The best way to listen to the best of the week is on the Relevant Radio app. Free and always free. Download and share the #1 free Catholic app today in the App Store.
Narcissism seems to me as if it's such a buzzword. Now, it makes sense in a culture that turns away from God. You would have more people who are self-conceited, narcissists, lacking virtue, grace, morality, faith, hope, transformation. It does make sense, but I also get a little tired, one, of hearing about how everyone that is a pain in your life or others' lives, how they're labeled a narcissist. I also am always startled by something I hear therapists, secular and even staunch Catholic therapists, who will say that a narcissist really can't and won't change. Some even make a rather unencouraging comment, such as a sarcastic comment, such as, good luck to someone who's perhaps married to a narcissist. And I radically disagree. I have a hard time believing that someone can't change. And not that I haven't known people who can be really difficult and, yes, really self-conceited, but I just find it so contrary to our Catholic tradition, to our human nature, to our God-given identity. People change for better and, unfortunately, for worse. And God's grace really is transformative. I've seen this in my own life, and by the grace of God, there's such a thing as change and grace in the sacraments. And just think about it. Just to mention 3 of the 7 sacraments that are all transformative: baptism, confession, and communion. The latter 2 you could receive every day if you so wish. Fundamentally, you look at our Catholic tradition, we're created with intellect and free will. That means that we can know God and come to love him. You even have this tradition of asceticism within the church, and you have many great saints who have lived radically sinful lives and been transformed. I've even heard it commented before that the beloved St. Francis of Assisi perhaps had some narcissistic tendencies, and that's part of why he wrote some of the prayers that he did, to let go of that self-love, that self-worship and idolatry. Someone might even be able to argue that someone such as St. Augustine was a narcissist. My guest today is Bree Solstad. Bree Solstad's story defies this idea that narcissists don't change, because she herself, in sharing her testimony, has called herself a narcissist. If you've not heard of Bree Solstad before, just a year and a half ago, she was a top earning producer, making the upwards of $100,000 a day. Now, over the last year and a half, she has converted to Catholicism. Now, Bree's with me now because in your story, Bree, you shared that you were truly the definition of a narcissist. And I'd like to drill down on your story, because why is it that you say that you were by definition a narcissist, and you see through God's grace that's been transformative?
Hi, Timmerie. It's so nice to be here again. Your introduction of me and your remarks is really not helping my narcissistic tendencies. You're always so kind. But I'd like to point out there is a difference between being egotistical and being narcissistic. Narcissism is when you're egotistical, but you'll step over anybody else to get what you want. Egotistical is just all about me, but it's not necessarily as offensive as narcissism. Not as evil, I guess you could say. And I wonder, that always surprises me. I've heard that also about how psychiatrists have said that a narcissist can't change. And I wonder if maybe they're confusing that with like a sociopath, because in a way they might be, I'm definitely not a professional in any capacity on psychology, but maybe they are somewhat linked. A sociopath has no feelings whatsoever. And a narcissist, also has no feelings in that regard of like always me, and being completely self-absorbed. But I think it's not just me who's saying this. Other people in my life have said this, that I've changed. And it's just by the grace of God. I don't know, you did specify that Catholic psychiatrists are also of this opinion, which blows my mind. You mentioned St. Francis, and yeah, he was a womanizer. He valued money over anything else. And I think being both those things definitely has narcissistic tendencies or undertones. But I'm living proof, as are a lot of different people within our history and within Catholic history, that people can change. You can see the error of your ways and make amends and then vow to go forth and be narcissistic no more.
Mm-hmm. Would you have ever thought that such a transformation was even possible for yourself, yet alone someone else, prior to converting to Catholicism?
I guess I might say that it would have been a possibility for somebody else, certainly, but I never thought that I would be where I am right now. I think when I was in the throes of the life that I used to lead, it just everything I did reinforced that narcissism. And it was like the meaner I was, the more people that I stepped on, the more money I made, really. And so it's like a snake eating its own tail, or like a self-fulfilling prophecy. And I really didn't see any way out. And I didn't see my life being anything worth, bragging about, like, internally. When I look at my soul, if I had been Catholic, like, I was going to spend a long time in purgatory. The person I used to be is hardly recognizable to me right now. And the person I am now, I'm sure would have been completely unrecognizable to the person that I was.
There are people who are married to narcissists and in very painful circumstances, difficult people to live with. And again, I've heard therapists, religious and non-religious alike, have a not very optimistic view of this. And I guess my thought is, if you're someone who's living and navigating with someone who you believe to be a narcissist, who has been harmful toward you, as people of faith, and my perspective is God's grace can change and transform any heart, and in a way that is so astonishing we can hardly believe what can be done. And so I guess one of my questions for you is, who do you think was praying for you? Who was praying for you? And I think that's significant because your conversion came about and someone was intervening. Someone was praying for you. Who do you think that was? Or do you know who it was?
Well, the only possibility within this realm, a human person who's still alive, that would be my husband. I know that for a long time, after he reverted, it was kind of like a slap in the face to me. And for those years that we were at different ends of the Catholic spectrum, if you will, I know that he prayed for me constantly.
Mm-hmm. And how long before your conversion to the Catholic faith did your husband revert?
About 2 years, I think. Yeah, it was about 2 years. I now see how he almost kind of tricked me into, like, sitting down and watching Catholic content, or like, in a way, he almost kind of like Mr. Miyagi'd me, I say. Mother Natalia, Mother Gabriella, these are two nuns from Christ the Bridegroom Monastery. And just a side note, like, we've become really good friends, and I reached out to them and told them my story. And my husband and I have visited with them 2 times already this year. And I see now the reason why he featured these people in the background of, like, whatever was going on in the living room, or, like, if we would be driving in the car, he'd put on this podcast, and internally I would be, like, grumbling, but like, this is what he's into now, so I guess I'll just listen to it as well. And I found myself really intrigued, and, like, there are these 2 beautiful women who have consecrated themselves and their whole lives to Christ, and they just seem so happy and so loving. And then, on the flip side, I'd be like, well, of course they're happy and loving. They're nuns. Like, you could never have that. And, I know now that that's just my inner demon who was completely lying to me, and I fell for it. But in addition to, like, being happy and loving, they talked about struggles that they had. They talked about pride and other sins, and that blew me away. Getting to know them has just been an extraordinary opportunity, because it taught me that not only could someone who is devoted to Christ, they're actually actual human beings who go through the same struggles that I do, including, pride and ego and all these things. And then it also showed me that throughout my whole experience, all of these things have showed me that it is possible for me to be happy. It is possible for me to be whole again and to be loving and not to have to be irritable all the time or egotistical or, dare I say, narcissistic. And for me, it was really, I don't know that I was narcissistic in every single aspect of my life, but that was a huge factor. And now I don't really have to worry about that as much. And I'm so much happier because of it. Like a lot of times people will ask me, you had all this wealth, you were very successful, all of these things that supposedly make you happy. And were you happy? And the answer is always a resounding no. I cried all the time. I was constantly irritable. And just listening to certain people, specifically Mother Natalia, Mother Gabriella, even if they're just on in the background, my husband's watching this while I'm fixing dinner or doing some knitting or something like that. And just overhearing them always made me kind of stop what I was doing. And I wanted to know more. I wanted to know how it was that these women could live with their sins, admit their sins also publicly, and then at the same time be so happy and so loving and beautiful. And now, dare I say, I think I've found it. It's God,
That's incredible. And, for so many people who think, I'm married to someone who's a narcissist, I have a child who's a narcissist, maybe you're in the workplace. I found when people have really rubbed up against me, and for you, it might be your spouse, it might be someone you're working with, it could be a family member, whoever that person is, we have the opportunity to pray for them. And some people have no one. Because my question really is you really saw how you were a narcissist. And I love that you really pointed out the difference between someone who's egotistical, focused on me, very self-centered, versus a narcissist does that plus steps on people to get what they want. And I mean, someone was praying for you profoundly. That was your husband. He was exposing you to content that was good and role models and people who were happy intentionally, even when you didn't want it. He was kind of like you said, bamboozling you in different ways into hearing this content of people who were genuinely happy and confident. And those examples, that exposure, that prayer, God's grace ultimately really transformed you. Now, what do you believe as someone who now you see your eyes have opened, you were a narcissist before? What do you believe narcissists need to change? What was it for you? I know you're sharing about your husband's prayer, the exposure, the example, but can you share a little bit more about what's necessary, what's needed, and how it is possible?
Yeah, I'm glad that you asked that because I was thinking about that. You said, some of us may be married to a narcissist or our children are a narcissist. You as the person who's not that way, one of the things that it's really easy, I think, for somebody who is in that situation is to be an enabler. So if your child especially is acting egotistical, if your spouse is, you need to stand up and say something. Maybe like me, kind of, I wasn't even aware of how awful I was until I look back at it. And so I think that the best advice for somebody would be, don't be an enabler. Don't let them walk all over you. I'm not saying necessarily go out fighting and get confrontational, but I think that for every person that is narcissistic, there have to be people who are willing to be stepped on. And so if you just kind of go along with it and oh, well, that's her personality, or, oh, well, that's her job, or my child's going through a bad stage right now, don't make excuses for it. It's only going to get worse. And of course, remind them of the definition of sin. Sin isn't defined necessarily just by words or a pamphlet that you read over before you go to confession. Sin is defined by a rip within our relationship with Jesus. And that's just horrifying. That's really what hell is, right? Is a world without Jesus and, a rip within that relationship. And I know that probably wouldn't have meant much to me a year and a half ago, but right now that's something that I consciously think of on a regular basis is that's going to disappoint him? And what is he going to think? And how is that going to affect our relationship, me and Jesus? And, if I continue to act in this beastly manner, in this narcissistic, egotistical, awful way towards anybody. And so I think those are maybe like 2 starting points. Like, don't let yourself be walked on.
This entire episode of Trending with Timmerie is on the Relevant Radio app. The Relevant Radio app is completely free and updated daily with fresh articles, podcasts, and prayers. Don't delay, download the app today, and thanks for listening.